Hello, I'm Hamza Hussain from Dundee University Review of the Arts, and we're here in Leeds with Peepal Tree Press. We've got Jeremy here and Hannah. Peepal Tree Press is an independent publisher which focuses on Caribbean and Black British writing, and also some writing from South Asian diaspora as well. And we've got a few questions for yourselves. So just to let people watching know, how did the Peepal Tree Press begin?
It began nearly 35 years ago. It began out of an awareness that the kind of people who used to be publishing Caribbean writing were not publishing very much at all, and that there were and you know, I did a PhD on Caribbean writing, and I knew there were good writers who had got interesting manuscripts that were just not getting published. So I thought there was a niche there. Mm-hmm. You discovered soon afterwards why other publishers had withdrawn from the area. That, you know, people like Heinemann and Longman had been the publishers, and clearly I think they'd both been bought up. Accountants got in, and accountants saw that those series didn't make money, which has been a truth.
And it started with your kind of meeting with Ruth Lalmanar and Backdam.
Yeah, that was really a one-off. And I think doing it kind of convinced, you know, that it was a possible things to do. But that was done mainly because I'd had hospitality from him. I knew he was a writer. He was based in Guyana at a time where the Guyanese economy was in such trouble that you couldn't find paper for a lot of money.
Right.
Most things in Guyana, there was quite a lot of self-publishing in Guyana, but you couldn't get paper. Paper was one of the things that wasn't being smuggled in.
Right.
So I said to him, look, you know, I like these stories. I'll do them. And it started off as a one-off kind of thing, and then it grew from there.
And that happened in Guyana, or
no?
Was
that happened.
That
came back and did it, and I was still working as a lecturer, FE lecturer, and I got people at college to print it for me. And we sent it off to a binders, and I took it. I remember taking it to one of the third world radical book fairs in London, and I had a quarter of a stand and a little pile of books, and then discovered they actually sold.
Yeah, and so like you said, you've been around for about 35 years now. What have been some of the most challenging things about establishing Peepal as an independent publisher since then?
I think it's always getting over that kind of initial stage and moving beyond the initial stage into some kind of regularity. If you trace the history of kind of a small scale, I remember there are lots of small things who do one or two books a year, and then run out of steam, and then then disappear. So it's kind of so one of the challenges for any small independent starting up is basic things like getting distribution. And if you can't get distribution, then you're in trouble, and basically you have to go and sell books directly yourself. And in the very earliest days, we had distributors, but they weren't doing very much. And I sort of asked some bookshops, well, we haven't seen them for a year. So there was one stage where I actually, during one of the holidays, went round kind of some of the radical independent bookshops and actually repped and sold books there. But it's not a model you can persist in. But yes, what the challenge is for anybody independent and small is how you move from doing the one or two books a year to getting a kind of consistent flow, and that's about having kind of a proper distributors. It's about realising that there's one thing to make a book, it's another thing to sell a book. I was good friends with John LaRose, who ran New Beacon Bookshop. And they were one of the inspirations, but John LaRose said to me, look, any idiot can publish a book, but it takes brains to actually sell it, market it, sell it, and so there was always a bit of a lag between those two things.
And so now you've gone from obviously your beginnings to doing 20 20 books a year. So what's that like, bringing you in as well, Hannah? What's that kind of been like? Because you started as an intern in
I think
1994.
we've kind of been like, must have been like frogs in boiling water, because it does still stagger me that we do 20 books a year.
Yeah.
But there's no way back for us now, is there?
No.
Yeah, when I first started here, we didn't have any Arts Council subsidy. I mean, we're quite well funded now as a national portfolio organisation. But back then, we were printers by day, really, weren't we, and publishers at night, or in the spaces where we spectacularly failed to get some printing work. Or, and that way, I mean, we were kind of, it's not a hobby press, would you say, but with intent to be. We behaved like a proper publisher, but in truth we were really fitting it in around printing people's racing tip sheets, some kind of really interesting magazines of homeworkers, all sorts of things. But then the sort of digital revolution happened in printing, and that really changed Peepal Tree, didn't it? I mean, it actually made a lot of things impossible, such as, a lot of our print work just disappeared, because people were saying, you know what, we could just have this thing called a website, anyone could see it. So a lot of our customers went that way, but it meant, on the good side for us, that we could suddenly communicate with so many more people, readers, writers, customers. Is that about when I suppose we had distribution.
We always had
prior to the
distribution,
internet. But we didn't really sell many books direct, and that was a kind of holy grail, wasn't it? We used to have a little mailing list of 300 people and mail out selections of our new titles, what we'd managed to publish. And that would do quite well, wasn't it? But then once we got the website, it didn't lead to kind of spectacular sales overnight, but it just started to really just kind of like open out the people that we knew, I suppose.
Yeah, and you see, you've got to have a sort of a regular sort of cycle of books, and preferably some kind of backlist before distributors get interested in you.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of real challenge. And for us, doing that kind of model of running a print shop.
You've never wanted to buy books in, have you?
No.
I mean, it's possible to do that, to give yourself an artificially big list if you've got some money.
Yeah.
To go and buy, buy the UK rights to publish something that might have done quite well in South Africa or wherever. But I mean, we've always had a thing of Jeremy's always really wanted to kind of originate work, haven't you? Bring new things.
Yeah. I mean, occasionally. I mean, we do things occasionally, like where if some writer is based in the USA, then we might share, them with another co-publish with somebody. Whereas, it's in their interest to have an American publisher. But in general, but the printing was a very important part of the thing, because it meant that we could produce more books at a lower cost than paying somebody else's printing bills. So it enabled us to build up a list, and there was a crucial point where we suddenly realised that the backlist was generating, a healthy contribution to our
slightly more predictable
income.
contribution.
Predictable. You used to think, well, okay. And then there are the kinds of issues that you confront when you are printing with other people, is about printing new books, reprinting a book, and it's at that kind of point where fortunately it coincided with good quality digital printing. We sort of we dabbled our toes in it for a bit, which kept us going and sort of took out some of the pain out of printing. But then we decided, well, no, that wasn't the way we would go, because then
we literally reached a kind of crunch point where we either needed to invest a lot of money in new plant and machinery to produce the books, or
and then you spend all your time trying to sell the stuff.
Yeah.
And just sort of think, it's like, we don't really want to be printers.
No.
So we seem to probably crack how to be printers eventually. Yeah. But then it's like, that's not the point. But,
I
remember reading at one point that it was in a garage with your son.
It was in the garage. It was so it was so that it was there was a thing. Yeah, so we used to print with somebody just up the road by the university, and you'd shell out £1,000 for printing,
Still even back then.
which is a lot of money. And then at one stage he said, "Do you want to buy this old press off me?" And it cost £1,000.
Right.
And it worked for quite a bit, really. Yeah. But then you said, that £1,000, that so you could then produce 7 or 8 books, where
in the space of one.
In the space of one, where all you're paying for is the paper, because and particularly if you're not paying yourself to be a printer.
Yeah.
that helps.
Yeah, that helps. The uncosted labour.
Yeah. And apart from bringing, stories from the Caribbean into the UK, please, what have been some of the other kind of more rewarding things about the work you've done in People?
I think Hannah touched on the fact that we've kind of been much more committed to originating things rather than kind of buying things and things.
Or being fashionable.
Or being so that.
Which I think that points to the sort of strength in our backlist sales, that they weren't books that were published that were only going to work in that time scale and course of a particular zeitgeist. They're actually just books which were the best versions of themselves, really. So that's how things endure.
Yeah, no, that's right. And things like, there are probably some books from our earliest days which we will quietly let slip into wherever books go when they've done their time. But there are books which kind of maintain.
Yeah, not everything comes off, does it?
No,
but
books,
quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And and there are things where you can refresh your book, put your cover on it, so that backlist continues to be an important part of the thing.
I suppose on that, it's being able to do things like the Caribbean Modern Classics and things that you think you actually.
Yeah. We had a stroke of really good fortune at one point where the Trinidadian government got a big loan from, I think it's the Inter-American Fund or something, and they decided that they were going to put a Caribbean library into every secondary school.
In Trinidad.
And we did really well after that because
very good writers are coming from. In that generation.
So whether that's so that we suddenly had enough money in the bank to think about doing something which I'd wanted to do before, which was to start buying rights for some of the sort of classic earlier books. So at that point we did our Caribbean Modern Classic series, and it's about 50, 60 strong now. And that's kind of it's been reasonably well done commercially, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's still ongoing.
And still ongoing, and that suddenly people discovered the books that they wanted to be able to teach were just not available. So, so part of it was also about wanting to sometimes refresh the kind of stories around books, and kind of challenge some of the so that one of the kinds of things that you would sometimes find in some of the criticism was that all these books of the 60s, they were all male books, and they were all about they were all sort of nationalist, and they were very kind of heterosexual and macho and stuff. And yet, it's not true. And so going back and sort of looking and rereading stuff, that was part of so it wasn't just making them available, but also saying, well, look, the past wasn't quite as uncomplicated as you imagined it was.
And you mentioned kind of earlier about kind of digital printing and that sort of thing. How has that impacted Peepal Tree and the way you work, and with social media and things like that?
All of those make a huge difference. Without being kind of sort of, it's so much easier to be a publisher, independent publisher now than it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, we've had a website for about 20 years now. But there wasn't. You couldn't have had a website at the beginning. The only way you could really actually contact people was mailing stuff out to them.
All the processes took
All
a lot longer.
the processes took a huge amount longer. So you either pay somebody else a lot of money to make things for you, or you have to do it yourself. So that the process of actually putting a book together was so many stages. I mean, after the editing, the stage of making galley proofs, the stage of correcting galley proofs, the stage of pasting up galley proofs, the stage of making plates to run on, the stage of actually printing.
You're running back upstairs doing another galley proof because you spotted that egregious error.
All that kind of thing. So there was a lot of actually physicality. Whereas now, once that book that says such and such print on it, it just goes down. You just send it off down to our people in Exeter with how many copies.
To which warehouse.
Yeah.
And that's
So it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about having to kind of manage submissions and things. I imagine that's kind of made it easier to kind of keep track of those things and edit.
That used to be an awful part of, not every day, but just having to look through physical boxes and try and find a physical manuscript. And they were in this room, which is already not very tidy, but it just used to be lined, didn't it, with boxes. So to not see that, and the amount of paper we used to produce and that, a lot less.
And have you found that with obviously the digital age with the internet, social media, is it easier to find new voices in the Caribbean or the Black British writing, in terms of finding new talent that you want to publish?
Yeah, I mean, for us, one of the kind of most important kind of things have been the growth of literary festivals in the Caribbean itself. So that the Calabash in Jamaica, Bocas in Trinidad. I think it's its 9th year this year, and we've been there for all of those years. And one of the things that they bring writers from right across the region. So it's brilliant in that respect that suddenly, a writer from Jamaica suddenly can get a Trinidadian audience and that kind of thing. But it's also the thing where they showcase their up and coming writers. So I think there are also, in the UK there are a lot more writer development courses. That people like Apples and Snakes have different venues now. So I think that,
and that's all people having become just so much better connected. And that obsession with discoverability, like trying to make books discoverable, trying to make events discoverable, trying to make voices discoverable. But the potential's there.
More platforms.
The more platforms.
So one of the things that Hannah's been much involved with is the Sir Optimist International Prize.
Yeah.
Which is a prize. Go on, you.
I can't remember the name of it now.
Just
the SI Leeds Literary Prize, which is a prize aimed at women writers of colour for a novel or short stories and any work of fiction. And the interesting thing for that is there is no prescribed genre or anything that the books have to measure up to. They simply just have to be interesting to the panel of judges. And the success from that's been quite phenomenal in that spotlighting people, putting excerpts of their work on the website and having agents take it seriously. I think we've done it 3 times now, and we're at the point where agents watch for that to see who's getting long listed, who's getting short listed, and it's just that way of using predominantly the internet to shine a light on people, really.
Because you couldn't really do that without social media.
No. The whole kind of word spreading of do you know someone who's got a manuscript under the bed or things they're writing, get them to send it in now. It's been social media driven.
Because I was just thinking, we recently republished Kwame Dawes' Prophets as a sort of Jamaican narrative poem. And we published it first 23 years ago. And then when you think about how that arrived, it arrived as a physical manuscript. The correspondence about it is on paper. They came in airmail letters at that kind of time. So you know, the whole kind of digitisation of communication has just, you know, has really revolutionised it.
So now it can just be a file.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the fact that you had to reply to somebody by airmail was quite a good thing, because you could say, oh, I'm still waiting to hear from you or something. So, you know, that people didn't expect immediate responses to things.
Yeah, the pressure for the immediate responses.
That's harder to manage, but.
And you mentioned the Bocats Festival that you've been working on. Can you tell people a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean,
involvement is?
Bocas is a Trinidadian festival, although you know, so they invite people from all over.
Completely international.
International flavour to it. It's run in the Trinidad has a pretty modern national library, and that's where it runs from. Part of the place it also runs from where it's called the Old Fire Station, but it has a historical thing. It's where Derek Walcott's theatre group operated at one kind of stage back in the 70s. And it's run by a woman called Marina Slandy Brown, who used to be a very senior BBC producer. She went back to Trinidad, and with the idea that this would operate. It operates largely without government support, so the government's never been able to kind of manipulate it in any kind of ways. I think they largely get support from one of the big state corporations. They also, so it's a 4 or 5 day festival of writers. There's a children's festival. There
are offshoot festivals throughout the year in more remote parts.
Yeah, so at the beginning it was just in Port of Spain.
It has grown.
But it's grown and sort of spread out. But they also run there's a prize which is decently rewarded now. I think it's about 10,000 US for the main winner. So that people, you know, so that winners include people like Derek Walcott and Earl Lovelace and so on and so on. But okay, you know, sometimes we've had writers who won the prizes with their first book of poetry and things. So that, you know, that is quite hotly kind of competed for and bring sort of attracts a lot of attention. So it's an event where you get to see kind of international writers coming into it. They've been shrewd in the sense that they've often invited significant people from the UK, so that you know, they invite the sort of, you know, like senior editors from the Guardian literature thing, and they suddenly discover there's all this Caribbean writing around that's really very good.
Yeah,
and
I think it's a sort of slight quality shock that people.
Yeah.
This is a really top level, world class festival. Okay, and that's great.
Yeah. And then, you know, so and then they kind of do things like, so for instance this year Marina Warner is, I think, chief judge, so she will be around and doing stuff and so on. Marlon James is going to be there for it and things. So, you know, they've got pulling power, and they, you know, and also things like, you know, so other organisations will, you know, fund people to come to it. So I think, you know, the Commonwealth Foundation would do that and things, and connections with, you know, that they had a couple of years ago. They had a good relationship with Bloody Scotland, the crime writing thing, and people like.
And the Edinburgh International
Festival,
Urban Welsh was there.
Yeah.
That was great.
So that there, you know, and then there, you know, then there are kinds of invites back to things like the Edinburgh Festival by people who've been seen and heard there.
And do you find that it's a great way of, is that where a lot of your new kind of writers come from, or do you accept? I mean,
I mean,
it's talent spotting.
Yeah, there is a talent spotting thing going on.
But kind of anywhere that we turn up, I was interested to
see what people are doing.
What's new.
Yeah, and I mean, just at the minute, I think Trinidad in particular, is generating a lot of interesting writing. Some of which I think, you know, undoubtedly the Bocas Festival can take credit for as being a focus for it. But I think also that, you know, I mean, it's that kind of that mixture between being in Caribbean terms a relatively prosperous society, which is able to hold on to its kind of educated classes perhaps more than other places, but also a society that's in crisis in lots of ways in terms of issues of class, race, crime, political corruption. There's plenty of inequalities for writers to kind of get involved with.
And the other thing that was really interesting from you going on your website and things, and is your Inscribe project. Could you tell us a little bit about that, the development of other writers?
Yeah, I mean the Inscribe project began initially as a kind of separately funded project, which the Arts Council asked us, about 10 years ago it began, didn't it? 10, 11? It may be slightly longer.
I think it may.
And with the idea that it would focus on writers who got, they were not
we call them bubbling under.
Bubbling under was the kind of thing, the writers who who you thought should be getting published but were not getting published. It began initially as a very much a Leeds focused thing. So it began with Khadija George was recruited to run it, and she for 3 or 4 years was based in Leeds, and it kind of it generated a number of significant writers who we retained relationships with. I mean, like one of them, Seni Varatni, who'd been writing for a long time, but not getting published. I think he got somewhat probably confessed about being a bit disheartened by the whole process. And she was part of the thing. So it has a publishing side too. So Inscribe does chapbooks. So things are on the way towards becoming full collections, and it does anthologies. Like Filigree, the most recent one. This is the third, I think. So that Seni, we did her first book about 8 years ago or something. We did her second book about 3 or 4 years ago, and we're just doing her third book now. So it has worked.
Autumn poetry title.
Yeah. So and then the way Inscribe works is, it's run jointly by Khadija George and Dorothea Smart, who we published both of them in fact as poets, and their kind of emphasis is a kind of mixture of writing workshops, residential weekends, bringing in kind of people to sort of stimulate and generate ideas and things, but also on sort of practical professional development, about how can you earn a living as a writer when you know that if you're a poet you're not going to sell. You might if you sell 400 or 500 quid's worth of books a year, you might be doing all right, in terms of your poetry royalties. So that's part of what they're and often doing sort of that useful things like the Arts Council at the minute is quite good in terms of providing the means for sort of writers who've got talent but not time, or writers who are competing with having to earn a living from other things. So they run a decent kind of bursary system. So helping people to sort of present themselves effectively to get writing bursaries, and then agents and things like that.
And just to sort of wrap up, what sort of things are you working on at the moment? What should people be looking out for?
Well, I mean, we kind of split our list between. I mean, it varies a bit. I mean, we'd say roughly between fiction, poetry, and sort of, I suppose, academic non-fiction. And it varies. I mean, some years we might do more poetry, some years we might do more fiction, depending upon what comes in really, and what we like. But yeah, so one of the things we've been working away at, getting books to we're going to launch I think 7 new books at Bocas this year, and they're from each end of the spectrum. So we're kind of introducing a first collection of short stories by a young woman called Brianne McIver. I think she'd be about 27 or something, which for writers is quite young, really.
Yeah.
And these are kind of it's called Where There Are Monsters, and they're very contemporary stories, but they also dip into the Trinidadian folklore, Trinidadian folk tales, so that the kind of character, a kind of respectable businessman, also discovers that he's a Wagahoo, a werewolf, and he wakes up some mornings with blood on his hands and he doesn't know where it's come from. And that sort of thing. So they're quite gothic in the story. So that's kind of one end of the thing.
Established power.
So Kendall is I suppose after Walcott now he's probably one of the he's Lucia's outstanding poet. But Kendall is his 7th collection.
Right.
And a new collection of Kendall Hippolyte poems is people will look out for. And then one of the things at the kind of other end of a career, we're publishing a collection of essays by Gordon Rollaire. And Gordon is, he's in his late 70s now, but Gordon has been one of the founders of what you say is a Caribbean aesthetic. As a critic, he's been a phenomenally important critic in terms of one of the first people to write seriously about Kamal Brathwaite, one of the first people to write seriously about the connections between if you say the folk arts like calypso and other forms of art, and has just been an immensely serious, critical commentator on the Caribbean, and so we're both reprinting one of his earlier books
in the Caribbean
Modern Classic series, which was a book which he rightly, in a sense, had published in Trinidad, but of course the problem was then the copies never really got out of Trinidad.
Oh, right.
So after I'd say that after people like Kamal Brathwaite, Walcott himself as a critic, Sylvia Wynter, Gordon Rollaire is one of those important figures who kind of established what Caribbean writing was about and established its kind of centre of gravity, and was kind of one of those brave critics who would write about things that other people wouldn't write about. Whether if he thought something was important, he'd stake his reputation on it and say it's important. So we're pleased to be doing that stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thanks.